It works. All right, guys, welcome everyone. For those that have not seen the previous presentation, we're going to go through an overview first of the whole course of 3 webinars. The first session, we talked a lot about biochemistry and other basics. It's probably a lot easier if I just share my screen with you guys. There we go. Let's try it again. So we talked mostly about biochemistry and other basics. So we talked about things like what is a calorie, why do we need protein, and it was mostly about the physical part of things. We've also talked a little bit about science. We've talked a bit about things like progressive insight, like how reliable is science and why does it seem like science changes its mind all the time. Went over all those things. Today we're gonna switch it up. We're gonna talk more about goal setting and planning. And volgens mij komt een opmerking binnen. Kijken wat er is.
Yes, we are recording it, Minka, no worries.
Yes, we're recording it just in case you have to leave halfway or whatever. The second one is about goal setting and planning, and we're also going to discuss a bit about nutrition for performance versus nutrition for health, where they overlap, where they deviate. We've also had session what's healthy, what does performance mean, how do you set goals, and we're also going to give you guys some general guidelines today. And in session 3, we talked about lifestyle, dieting, different diets, roadblocks, things you encounter, why it's so hard to stick to diet, and so on. Session 1 and 3 have been recorded already, so if you have not seen them and you would like to see them and don't know where, let me know. Just send me a message on jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com. I'll make sure you get the proper link. For today, we're going to start a bit about what is healthy, and we're going to make basically a separation between preempting and reactive eating for health. Not everyone agrees on what health really means. We could be talking about physical health. We could be talking about mental health. And for nutrition, there is always a bit of an overlap. Because if you are super strict with your nutrition, but you have a very disturbed relationship to food, food causes you stress and feelings of guilt and so on. Even if you're performing well in your sport, is that really considered healthy? So we have preemptive eating for health. That is basically eating in a way that you lower the risk of disease. So if a specific type of food increases the risk of cancer, you could try to eat less of it so you decrease the risk of cancer. That's preemptive eating for health. Reactive eating for health is very different. That refers to eating because you already have an existing issue. That could be diabetes, for example, which means that normally, if you have no disease, disorder, whatever, your body is very well able to handle the things you eat. For example, the carbohydrates, the sugars in your food. But when you have diabetes, depending on the type you have, your body has trouble processing that. So that means you need to manage that in your diet. Why is this so important? Because there are certain things that are very different for healthy people than for ill people. And some people somehow intertwine the two. They will take a statement based on a study in ill people and they will try to translate that to healthy people, and it doesn't always work that way. So we have to make a proper distinguishment here. I am mostly going for healthy people here in general. So keep in mind that a lot of things I say may be different if you have a pre-existing condition somehow, right? Simple example, high protein diets, usually fine for your health or even good for your health. But if you have pre-existing kidney issues, they could be an issue. So keep those things in mind as we talk about health in general. If I talk about a specific disease or anything, I will explicitly mention so. Most of what we're talking about today in terms of health will be about preemptive health. So on health, we're going to go through a bunch of subjects related to nutrition and health. I'm going to go through them all. And after that, or in between, obviously ask questions if you want me to go more in depth. I'm just going to scratch the surface on most subjects. But if you're interested in a specific subject, please let me know and I can delve more in depth on that specific part. Any questions so far? Remember, if you have any questions, please don't wait. Just put them in the chat and we'll get to them as soon as possible. Nothing so far?
Nothing so far.
Cool. Let's get started on the good stuff. Consistency. So this is not the first thing that comes to mind with most people when we talk about health. The thing here is that it doesn't matter if you eat something healthy or adhere to a specific diet unless you do it consistently. So some people are very worried about eating something unhealthy. Maybe you're worried about binge drinking on alcohol. Maybe you're worried about certain ice cream, junk food, whatever. If you eat that once, but you eat very healthy most of the time, why do you think that would make you unhealthy? Let's flip that around. Let's say you eat unhealthy all the time, and for one meal you eat lots of broccoli and fruits and whatever healthy stuff. Is that going to make you healthy? No. So why would it be the other way around? Why would you demonize certain foods up to the point that you're not allowing yourself to eat it? What matters most is the big picture, the overall diet, the overall habits. So that's about the consistency. And a lot of people are a lot less consistent than they think. So this is a very big issue. People say they eat very healthily, and then you ask them to like have a food diary, and they will write down for 7 days what they eat. And they're suddenly more mindful. They usually start writing down stuff they normally eat. They don't normally eat. So that's already very unreliable with a lot of people. The thing is, they are not as consistent as they often think. If you eat very healthy for, let's say you want to lose weight, and you eat to lose weight 6 days out of the week, but on the 7th day you compensate for the rest of the week. It feels like you're very consistent because 6 out of 7 days you have been very consistent. You've been putting in effort, so it feels like you're very consistent. But still, that one day throws off your consistency so much that the end result is 0. So you have to be able to be consistent, and ideally be able to objectively measure that if that is necessary for performance, for example. For health, you still need to be consistent, but it's a bit harder to measure because in healthy people, there are usually not very specific things to look at. There are very few biomarkers, as we call it, that can predict whether you're going to be ill unless you're going to go through super rigorous examinations. So long story short, be consistent at whatever you're doing if you want to have long-term results rather than short-term results. The next one. This is also somewhat controversial because in a lot of cases, people will say being overweight or especially being obese is bad for your health. Well, there's no discussion that obesity is a factor in health. The thing is that if you factor in fitness, and we're talking about cardiovascular health, mitochondrial health, and so on, suddenly a lot of the obesity factor falls away. It doesn't mean it's not a factor. It just means that it's not as big as a lot of people make it out to be. So that's point one. Fitness may be a better indicator of overall metabolic health than body weight. That's one. Point two, we know that people in general are overweight or obese. I think in the US, it was like 70% of the people is overweight. In the Netherlands, we're like 40, 50%. And among those are a lot of obese people. Okay, sure. So for like the last 50 years or so, we've been trying to get people to lose weight. We have not done a very good job so far. Hundreds, if not thousands of diets, countless gurus, all saying like they have this one perfect option to lose weight, all the supplements and so on. Still after 50 years, we have not solved anything at all. No. We've only seen increases in being overweight and obesity, and even a lot of second world countries and even third world countries who are becoming more prosperous, we even see obesity numbers rise there. So we also know from studies that 90 to 95% of all the people who attempt to lose weight, they regain the weight and sometimes end up heavier than they were before. So should we be focusing on losing weight so much when it comes to health? If we know that most people end up heavier than they were before, every single weight loss attempt is a risk. So should we be focusing so much on losing weight, or should we be focusing more on stabilizing your body weight, becoming fitter, so getting people to enjoy, perform sports consistently and so on? Would that not be better for our health in general, right? The big focus on losing weight also means that we stigmatize a lot of overweight people, which has a lot of negative effects. A bunch of studies have been done on it. One example was where when overweight people went to the doctor for issues they had, they would not be examined thoroughly, they would not be taken seriously, and the comment they would get was, you need to lose more weight, then I'll help you, right? We also see from psychological studies that overweight people are more often associated with being lazy and all that sort of stuff. And we know from practice that is not true. There are plenty of overweight people who are very successful in their careers, for example. Are they suddenly lazy then? One might think that there are actually more factors factored in gaining weight. So long story short, Trying to focus on a low body weight or losing weight may actually be counterproductive in some cases. And maybe we should shift our focus to maintaining a stable body weight, a healthy relationship with food, and more on sports, right? Any questions on this part so far?
Let's take a look. No, nothing.
All right, going to give you guys a few awkward silent seconds to see if you guys have any questions regarding this. Considering that there is such a huge focus on losing weight, from supplements to diets to, well, pretty much anything around you, commercials where slender is better and so on. It's somewhat controversial to say that maybe we should not focus on losing weight, because everyone's like, well, but being overweight is so bad. Well, the last 50 years, we haven't really garnered any results. So why would the next 50 years be any different, right? Assuming we keep focusing on losing weight. No questions, so we'll get to the next one. I mentioned this a minute ago, healthy relationship with food. What does that mean? It means that food in general, that your diet does not cause you unnecessary amounts of stress that are detrimental to your quality of life. Sounds great. What does that mean? It means that you do not feel guilty all the time when you eat something tasty. It means that you do not start crying when you are on the scale, or when you are worrying about, well, what should I eat today? Oh, well, I need to be super healthy. I need to eat this. I need to eat that. But I was going to go out to dinner with my friends and they all want to go to this pizza place. Now I can't join them. There are a lot of situations where people are so worried about eating for their goals, whether it's health or performance, that is detrimental to their mental health. And in some cases, it leads to eating disorders. It is not a huge secret that we see this in the bodybuilding world, for example, where the focus is often on the physical part. But if you have a coach who does not coach you in the mental aspect enough, and you are even slightly prone to eating disorders, you increase that risk as well. We know in sports that the biggest risks in terms of developing eating disorder are among individual sports, and especially when aesthetics are important. So that means bodybuilding, but also gymnastics to some extent, and when there are weight classes. So in judo, you see it to some extent as well. Where there are no aesthetics involved in the sport, no weight classes, and where there is a group effort, let's say soccer or rugby, we see way lower incidences of this. So that is something to consider before all the other stuff, to be able to be consistent, to be able to be mentally healthy. Working on a healthy relationship with food is something people might need to emphasize more, rather than worrying about how many grams of peanut butter are you eating every day, you know, that sort of stuff. Enjoy food. Don't forget about the social cultural aspects. Some people are very hardline about the whole food is fuel thing. Well, strictly speaking, food is fuel. Food is literally what makes you, what gives you the energy to actually do things throughout the day, whether it's sport or just having your brains function. The thing is, food has a lot of social cultural aspects. A simple example is that you'll see people eating and drinking differently when they're with friends. Maybe during the week you don't drink alcohol, but on the weekend when you're with friends, then you start drinking beer or wine, which you normally don't do. Why? That's because of the social aspects. Then, of course, are the cultural aspects. The Ramadan is a nice example of this, where people fast for a certain period of time in Muslim culture. And of course, you see this in a lot of other aspects as well. There's one example of a study where they found that people who had one lengthy dinner at least once a week, lasting at least 3 hours with friends, had measures of a higher quality of life than people who did not. Now, this was a relatively small study, so of course it doesn't say that much, but it does add to the whole body of evidence that food has more functions than just fuel. So keep that in mind. This especially relates to the whole healthy relationship with food. You should be able to enjoy it, and there is no reason why you cannot combine performance, health, physically, and health mentally all together, together with all those social cultural aspects. The only time when you need to make compromises is in extreme situations, maybe when you have a certain disease, maybe when you are a bodybuilder, you want to get on stage, or you're some other high-level athlete that needs to be super strict with certain things. And for the vast majority of people, it's just learning proper habits and having a healthy relationship with food, and you're basically already there for the most part, right? Not everyone needs to get on a stage in a bikini, oiled up, showing your muscles to other people, right? Questions so far?
Nothing.
Awesome. That must mean this is an amazing, clear story. Let's see. Is weight loss healthy? Well, I kind of went into this with the whole stable body weight and low body weight thing. But in general, physically speaking, when you are overweight or obese, losing weight generally has a positive effect on your health. There's, as far as I know, no discussion on that. The thing is, what you need to consider is that is the weight loss sustainable? And if it is not, then it is certainly not healthy because you may end up heavier than you were before. That's the whole risk I mentioned before. So it's not the weight loss itself that's probably fine. It's probably good for you. The thing is, can you make it sustainable? And if not, then weight loss may not be healthy. There are exceptions. In some cases, if someone is in direct danger because of their situation, maybe someone needs surgery, but they can't have surgery because they're too obese. In those situations, yes, then you may have to go on a crash diet because it's life-saving in your case, right? Those are some extreme situations, but in general, you may need to consider, is weight loss healthy? Possibly, but make it sustainable. Questions?
Yes. Is there a way or stappenplan to work on a healthy relationship with food?
Yes. Yes, there are actually many ways to do it. Not all of them as science-based. I don't know how successful all of they are. It also depends on the situation, because if you have a specific disorder, then we're talking about things like system therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy. Then you really need to find a specialist for this, someone who preferably works evidence-based, has experience with coaching these people. Ideally, someone who works together with other professionals. I know there in Utrecht there is one group, I forgot the name, but they have some program that works with a physical therapist, a dietitian, a psychologist focused on eating disorders, and they all work either interdisciplinarily or integrally. I don't know exactly how they work, but then I would recommend something like that. If we're not talking about a disorder, but we're talking about something that is simply bothering you, maybe something like you have, let's say you have a tendency like once every week or so to just eat everything in the house, you know? Sometimes it's just a matter of figuring out why do you do that, what are the triggers, and taking away those triggers. Sometimes it is just a mindset shift, and I'm saying just a mindset shift, but sometimes that can be a very lengthy process of analyzing why you're doing something, why is it problematic, and then step by step trying to trying to move towards a better relationship with food. So yes, there are steps. I have helped some people with this, but I am certainly no psychologist. So if we're talking about a full-blown disorder, please seek professional help. If it is something smaller than that, then I might be able to help, because yes, there are certain methods that you can use for this. And basically they all start with proper habits that make things automatic, you know, so you don't have to worry too much about things because it costs mental energy. And then just kind of delving into what's going on in your head. So I mentioned earlier the example about people worrying about being super unhealthy. Actually had a conversation last week with a lady who had the same issue. At some point she said something like, oh, sometimes I eat a whole bar of chocolate. I'm like, okay, and well, isn't that bad? I'm like, well, how often does it happen? She's like, well, once every 3 weeks or so, when I'm being too deprived and I'm trying to be super healthy for 3 weeks. Like, well, why not relax a little bit? You know, why not eat like a few pieces of chocolate every 2 or 3 days instead of waiting until you reach that point? Because physically, it doesn't really matter whether you eat a piece of chocolate every day or like a whole bar every week, something like that. But mentally, it can make a huge difference. So I asked her, like, well, you're worried about eating one chocolate bar every 3 weeks. Would it work the other way around? If you were super unhealthy, would eating broccoli once every 3 weeks make you healthy? No, then why would it work the other way around? And that was kind of an eye-opener for her. That doesn't solve the issue, obviously, but sometimes it starts with those little light bulb moments. And from there, again, it depends on the situation. So I hope that answers your question. More?
Nope.
A response.
Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Cool. No questions. Then we will move on to the next one. Is natural healthy? All right. So it's a very hard question to answer because not everyone agrees on what natural is. So I think it was Zimbabwe, it was somewhere in Africa, they have these avocado plantations, right? But avocados did not come from there. Avocados came from South America, right? Is that natural? Because people in South America have had thousands of years to adapt to avocados, but people in the West, I think in Europe, we started eating avocados a few hundred years ago, right? Maybe less so. We know that a lot of people are lactose intolerant. They cannot handle dairy in Asia, but in Europe, most of the people here don't have any issues with it. So it's very context dependent. Then there is a very big gray area because, well, a potato is not really processed, boiling water and then putting your potatoes in there, cooking the potatoes. Is that processing? Well, a little bit. What about wheat? If we're talking about wheat that we turn into bread, there's a lot of processing going on. Does that make it bad? Well, again, that's kind of hard. And what about certain mushrooms? Some of them are poisonous. They're natural. It doesn't make them healthy. So I often tell people that as a guideline, eating more unprocessed foods is usually a good thing because it automatically steers you away from junk food. Make sure that you eat things that are richer in minerals and vitamins. So as a general guideline, it could be good, but it is certainly not true that natural is always 100% better. A simple example is that if we process wheat a lot, you get white bread, and white bread loses a lot of its fiber and mineral content, which means that white bread, which is more processed than whole wheat bread, is unhealthier in that sense. So then we could say, well, natural is healthier. On the other hand, if you eat potatoes and mushrooms raw, they can be poisonous to some extent. Most people only get some gastrointestinal distress, some stomach aches, nothing bad. But then actually processing is actually better. There are certain vegetables, I don't know off the top of my head which ones, but I know there's a few vegetables where the vitamin and mineral content is absorbed in your body better after boiling the vegetables rather than eating them raw. But again, this depends on the vegetable. So long story short, is natural healthy? It depends on the product, on the method of processing and the amount of processing. But eating mostly unprocessed foods can be a very good guideline in an overall healthy diet. All right, here's a whole bunch of them. Any questions on the things before we go into the ones down here?
Nothing yet.
I'm going to save nutrient timing for last because fasting also falls under nutrient timing, and it's been quite a hype recently. So I want to talk a bit about fasting in more depth. Let's just start with hydration. There's not a lot to be said for it. If you get dehydrated, at some point you die, so you need to be hydrated. But for most people, drinking when you're thirsty is usually fine. However, there are exceptions. One exception I usually mention is that older people sometimes lose their sense of thirst. So they need to drink, otherwise they get severely dehydrated. But in itself, for most people, your body adapts really well hormonally to water intake or fluid intake. So yes, there are some guidelines like drink 1.5 liter of fluids every day, or drink 1 liter of fluids for every 1,000 calories you eat. There's a bunch of guidelines for that, but your body adjusts very well in general. So for most people, I wouldn't worry about that. If you do feel like you are dehydrated somehow, for example, I have the issue that I don't drink much during the day. So I often wake up at night with like a slightly sore throat and being super thirsty. Yes, then I have to drink preemptively even if I don't feel like it. But that is a specific situation. So hydration, drink when you're thirsty, that covers it for most of the people. Regarding supplements, in number 3 of the webinars, we went more in depth. We went through a whole list of supplements and we talked about them. So watch that webinar on YouTube if you want to know more in depth. But in general, supplements are very useful for your health if you lack something. If you lack a specific, let's say a vitamin B12, some vegans, because you don't get vitamin B12 through plant-based products normally. So as a vegan, you have a higher risk of a deficit of vitamin B12. So what do? You take a vitamin B12 supplement, right? At the same time, taking too much of a certain supplement can also be bad. We've seen situations of vitamin B6, people overdosing it and they got some neurological damage. So supplementing is not necessarily always good. It depends on the supplement and on the specific situation. And even in the specific situation, you could be masking an underlying issue. Some people have low vitamin D levels. Well, could be because we're in the Netherlands, not a lot of sun, sure. But there could also be an underlying issue. So let's say you have an underlying disease without you knowing, and it causes you to have low vitamin D levels. And you take your vitamin D supplement, and your vitamin D levels go up, but the underlying cause is not addressed. So you still have the same issue. So that's a bit complicated, and usually the best thing you can do is ask your doctor to, measure your blood values, see if what your complaints are physically or mentally, in this case as well. So supplements, if you are deficient in something, yes. Otherwise, maybe, but probably not. It's not so that the more you take of something, the better, right? Majoring in the minors. Majoring in the minors basically refers to putting a lot of effort into small things, and instead of worrying about the things that actually matter. Simple example. Usually most countries recommend that you eat 200 or 300 grams of vegetables every single day as a minimum. Nowadays, you hear a lot of people complaining about, we have less and less vitamins and minerals in our vegetables and fruits nowadays. The quality is so much worse. Well, it's true to some extent, even if it's not such a big difference, but there is a difference. The thing is, we already know that most of the people do not eat 200-300 grams of vegetables a day. Why are you worrying about 2% less vitamin C in your spinach if you're not eating the spinach to begin with, right? That's majoring in the minors. Worrying about the details that are not solving anything for anyone. And the same goes if you're trying to, for example, lose weight. You might be worrying about the glycemic index of a certain type of carbohydrate. Why are you worrying about that if you cannot have a proper healthy relationship with food to begin with? Or if you cannot even have know how many calories you should take in, or any alternative method instead of counting calories, right? So focus on the things that matter. And if that's in order, then you can take a look at the rest, right? So don't worry too much about the details. Organic food. That's an interesting one because organic has often been touted as being healthier than non-organic food. The thing is, we don't know, because the research we have right now says that there's probably no difference. We even see some organic food that has a less of certain nutrients than other foods. We don't really know. However, it may be different 20, 30, 40 years from now, that we find out that non-organic foods are somehow unhealthier. Maybe something in the long run, we'll find out that, some of the pesticides we're using cause cancer or something. There's been a lot of discussion on glyphosate, on Roundup from Monsanto and stuff. Right now, it seems that it's not, sorry about that. Right now, it seems like it's not really a big issue, but it's quite possible that in some years, we're going to find out there is an issue. Right now, organic food, as far as we know, for health is no different. However, there are some differences in other factors. So when we're talking about animal well-being, for example, it's not always the case, but in general, a lot of organic farms take better care of their animals in terms of well-being than most non-organic farms. Again, this is not always the case, but as a general rule of thumb, you usually see that difference. The only thing organic food does have going for it, aside from what we mentioned, is that there are more bioactive compounds in there. So we know we have protein, and we have minerals and vitamins. We have lots of other compounds in there, of which we don't know exactly how they function or how they work. It is estimated that there are thousands upon thousands of these compounds, those biological active compounds. One example is resveratrol, which is in grapes and also in wine, which supposedly protects from cancer to some extent. That is just one out of thousands. Maybe some of these in organic food have a beneficial effect to us. So again, it's quite possible that we're going to find out in a bunch of years that organic food is healthier than non-organic food. We just don't know it yet, because right now it's pretty much even, doesn't matter. But there is some suggestion that in the future we might find out that organic food is better, right? The next one, GMOs. This is also a very tough subject to tackle for one very simple reason. Not everyone agrees on what is a GMO. GMO stands for genetically modified organism. And the thing here is that with GMOs, some of it is really just crossbreeding. So bananas, for example, there's actually some pictures going online about fruits, what they looked like before we started crossbreeding them. So you had strawberries that were inedible and bananas that had like these, that were very small, had these weird chunks in them. Over time, we started crossbreeding certain fruits, so they would be tastier and easier to eat and easier to produce and so on. That's just crossbreeding, but it's also a GMO. Then there are also things where they try to experiment in labs. There was one example, I saw some anti-GMO posts about people saying like, oh, well, they put a fish gene inside strawberries. Now, that sounds very sensational, but what does it really mean? Does it really say anything? I mean, I think we have like an 85% same DNA as birds, for example, 85%. It's not that we actually look like birds or behave like birds or, anything like that. Still, saying that we're 85% like birds sounds pretty sensational. The same thing with the fish gene inside a strawberry. What does it actually say? Well, that's the reason why I always emphasize, like, look at the science and not at the sensational stories, because it just doesn't say anything. So yeah, there's a whole range of different techniques in genetically modifying our food. I am certainly not an expert on this. There are many, many different methods in this. And as far as we know, in general, GMOs are not necessarily an issue. There may be certain issues at some point. For example, it's quite possible that if we create a crop, a certain vegetable or a certain fruit that is very resistant to pesticides, so that we can use more pesticides, then we find out the pesticide is bad for us. There could be something going on there. It's just that right now, it's probably not an issue. There are some situations, like I mentioned earlier, around Roundup, the glyphosate that is used here and there. Sometimes you hear some horror stories about South America where they spray lots of glyphosate and farmers get ill and stuff like that. Aside from it being anecdote, we know that in some of those countries, they're not very strict about the rules and such. So it's quite possible that they had 10 times the normal allowed amount of glyphosate spread in a very unhealthy manner. Whereas in a country like the Netherlands, we're fairly strict on how all these things go, which would explain why you don't hear all these weird stories from the Netherlands, but only from certain countries like, I think it was Argentina, Brazil, not sure which country it was. So yeah, there are some cases documented there are issues, but at the same time, we also know about golden rice. There were Asian countries where there was a big vitamin A deficiency, and I'm not sure if it was Monsanto or another big company. At some point, they added vitamin A to rice. So they called golden rice, and they managed to fix that deficiency among children in that area for a large part. So that's an example where GMO did a lot of good. So are GMOs bad? Well, first you need to say, okay, what are we exactly talking about? What technique, what crop, what food? And then we can talk about, are they good or bad? So far, as far as we know, it's probably nothing bad. But again, some of those techniques and those crops have been relatively new. So we might find out in 50 years that yes, they have been causing cancer all along. We don't know. Cool. Any questions for now before we go to detoxing and nutrient timing?
Nothing yet.
No angry people saying that we work for a big pharma or anything?
Not yet.
Cool.
Feel free to arrange a sponsorship deal with Big Pharma.
Yes, we wish we would get money just for saying that GMOs are okay. That would be nice. All right, let's go on to detoxing. The term detoxing usually refers to people getting off drugs. So when you're going into a clinic, you're addicted to alcohol or anything else, you detox from that specific thing. That used to be the meaning anyway. And nowadays it often refers to a certain diet, usually a temporary thing you do for 3 days or a week or even a month, maybe even longer, where you're trying to detoxify your body. The idea is that your body stores toxins from basically anything you do, and you need to get rid of those toxins. Well, there is a core of truth to that, because yes, your body can store toxins in fat cells, that is true, but your body does a very fine job in detoxing itself. We have several organs like your kidneys and your liver who do this constantly. Your kidneys even have more function than you need. That's the reason why you can easily donate a kidney, because your kidneys generally function very well. So yeah, the whole getting rid of toxins thing, it's simply not true. Then as for its effects, what does it actually do? Well, let us assume that all of the benefits from detoxing and sport fasting and all the 3-day metabolic switch diets and all those things. There's actually a whole lot of them, which is funny because if it was so true, then why would one diet not fix it all? Well, there's a whole bunch of them. And even if all their claims were true, their claims about weight loss, their claims about metabolic switches, their claims about health, their claims about, well, anything, sports performance even. If all those claims are true, you're going to do that for 3 days. And then what? You go back to your old lifestyle and build up toxins again? You know, remember the first point here up top, consistency, right? What good is 3 days of detoxing, a week of detoxing going to do to you in the long run? Are you going to detox all the time? Or are you going to spend 200 euros for a 1-month program where you drink like several shakes a day and not much else? So, yeah, whole story about detoxing, but the long story short, it's complete bullshit. Don't do it. Good. Next one. Nutrient timing. Nutrient timing basically refers to taking certain nutrients at certain times of day. And basically what it means is that, for example, you eat your carbohydrates before training so you can have a better workout. That's one example of nutrient timing. Spreading your protein intake throughout the day for better recovery. That's also an example. But one that relates to health a lot is fasting. Fasting refers to not eating, sometimes not drinking for a certain period of time. Popular examples include lean gains, where you eat everything within 8 hours in one day, so you don't eat for 16 hours. So let's say you start eating at 12 in the afternoon, you stop eating at 8, you don't eat outside of that. Eat, stop, eat, where 1 or 2 days a week you don't eat anything at all for 24 hours, all you drink is water. They're pretty popular for sports performance, for weight loss, and so on. There's two things here. One is when it comes purely talking about health right now, what does it do? We see in a lot of studies that people improve their biomarkers. So the triglycerides in the blood, the fat in the blood sugars are lower, the blood pressure lowers, and so on. So we see that happen a lot with people fast. The thing is, when you look at the studies comparing it to regular diets where they have a normal caloric deficit, you see the same thing happening. So what can we conclude from that? Well, considering we have several meta-analysis, which is a study that looks at all the studies together, we have a whole bunch of studies now that conclude that intermittent fasting, as it's called, is simply a method to get in less calories. Because most people can eat more calories in 16 hours than they can in 8 hours, right? It doesn't go for everyone, by the way. I've done several variations of intermittent fasting, and I can compensate in 4 hours what I've eaten, what I've not eaten over the rest of the day. So I did the warrior diet in the past, which is where you only eat 4 hours a day, usually. And I would just eat all my calories from the day in those 4 hours. Not a challenge at all. So for me, that didn't do anything at all. I think my girlfriend is laughing at me right now.
It's a talent.
It's a talent. Thanks. So yeah, in terms of health, we can assume that the benefits are from losing weight. However, we have some scientists who focus on the mechanisms, the metabolic pathways that activate when you fast. And we do see some interesting things happening. We see that cells reproduce faster and they replace themselves faster. We see some other mechanisms like where your body starts producing more ketones to make up for the lack of sugar that you get in your body. There's a whole bunch of complicated stuff, certain proteins that start functioning in your body harder than normally do, which is supposed to help with brain function, etc., etc., etc. Great story. All the mechanisms work on paper. They're all true. But what does it really mean? Right? The mechanism could be true, but what do we see in real life? Something can be statistically significant, which means that it's measurable, it's there. But is it clinically significant? Which means, does it actually do anything worthwhile? Because if you, let's say a simple example, if you have a 0.004% increase in, I don't know, brain focus, are you ever going to notice that? No. But maybe in a laboratory with some electrodes on your head, you're going to notice a difference. So a lot of mechanisms, but they have not been able to actually make that significant for anyone in real life. There's also another issue there. And that is that just like with pretty much any diet, intermittent fasting does have a lot of challenges for a lot of people in terms of adherence. Most people simply cannot stick to certain diets. And as far as we know, intermittent fasting is not different from any other diet. So yeah, long story short, is it going to do anything good for us in terms of health? As far as we know right now, probably not. But if it is something you can stick to, if it makes it sustainable, if you can be consistent in the long run, like past a few years, then yeah, it may actually have some benefits for your health in that sense, because it makes you able to stick to something, right? Cool. So far for this sheet, any questions on this so far?
Nope.
Any of the above subjects?
I don't think so, unless they were asked before my laptop crashed. In that case, I won't be able to see them.
All right, then I'm gonna see if, no, I should be able to see it. Let me see. Sorry guys, I'm gonna stop the share for a bit to see if anyone says. No new questions. Great, I assume that means that everyone is super clear about what everything is and how everything works and all that. It's great. Gonna bring you guys back into the presentation for the next slide. Was not working? There we go. Next one, I'm gonna give you guys some practical guidelines. So we've been talking about a bunch of subjects, just to give you guys a bit of insight on how things work. And you may have noticed is that I am, except for the detoxing thing, I am not very hardline about certain subjects, because there is a lot of nuance and there is a lot of context necessary to be able to claim certain things. For example, I'm not pro-GMO, I'm not anti-GMO. We don't know it yet, right? So far, everything seems fine, but we may find out it's different in the future. We just don't know yet. So I just try not to be sensitive to all the hypes and the sensationalist stuff. I try to look at it as objectively as possible, and that's not always possible, I know, but still trying that at least saves for a lot of stress. Right now, there are some people lobbying to make sure that orthorexia is taken up in the DSM, which is the whole list of psychological disorders where bulimia and anorexia are in. And orthorexia is not in there yet. It's basically like people are obsessively and unhealthily worried about their health and trying to be muscular and fit and lean and healthy and so on, up to the point that it is detrimental to their mental health. As far as I know, unless it has changed recently, as far as I know, it is still not officially a disorder. But we have seen so many people with issues regarding this that there are people saying that it should be categorized as a disorder. So yeah, I would certainly try to avoid the stress that comes with all that stuff. And just, you know, try to be very Dutch about it. Just be very down to earth about it. All right, first guideline. A varied diet with mostly unprocessed food that is tasty but does not cause you to overeat. So a varied diet means that you actually have some variety in your diet. If in the morning you eat wheat meal, like brinta, and in the afternoon you eat bread, and in the evening you eat pasta, it seems like you have eaten 3 different things, but you're still eating wheat 3 times a day. That is not variety, right? Mostly unprocessed food. I explained this earlier. Unprocessed is not always better than processed, but in general, unprocessed foods are more likely to steer you towards things that are rich in minerals, rich in vitamins, rich in fibers that fill you up, and so on. At the same time, it usually prevents you from eating a lot of stuff that has lots of salt and all that sort of stuff that you don't want to get too much of. Well, you want your food to be tasty because, you know, you don't want to hate your life, but you don't want it to cause you to overeat. So there are certain things that cause you to overeat and certain things that do not. So a personal example, boiled potatoes, I love them, but I'm not going to overeat on them. You know, if I have a few of them, that's fine. But for bread or pasta, that's something I enjoy so much that even without anything on it, no sauce on the pasta, nothing on the bread, it's easy for me to overeat on bread and pasta. Does that mean I can't eat bread or pasta? No, I can certainly do. You just have to be a bit more mindful about portions or maybe eat them less often and so on. So in general, if you could stick to this guideline, you would probably do very well, better than most people in terms of health when it comes to the whole preemptive eating for health. Any questions about this guideline?
Nope.
Nope, nothing at all.
Nope, nope.
Gonna give you guys a few awkward silent seconds once more. Drink some here. Can you guys see me?
But yeah, but you need to hold it up. Yes.
Look, artificial sweeteners. Yes. I think we haven't even talked about those.
Not yet.
If you guys want to go more into artificial sweeteners, please let me know. As a general guideline, small amounts, fine. Large amounts, probably fine. But be very mindful of polyols. Polyols are certain carbohydrates. They're sometimes used as sweeteners, and they can give you very bad GI distress. So that's like being very gassy, having stomach aches, stuff like that. So polyols, which we see in protein bars, for example, or certain low-calorie candy, it's something you might want to look out for. It's not necessarily bad. You're not going to get anything weird from it, except for, stomach aches if you get too much of it. Cool. Next. That vegetables, fruits, legumes, and whole grains make up the bulk of your food. I'm not super fan of the whole grains thing here. Not that I'm against it. It's just that the first three, vegetables, fruits, and legumes, are probably things that people could eat more of. Whole grains, sometimes as well, but a lot of people already eat decent amounts of whole grains. But I want to emphasize vegetables, fruits, and legumes. So legumes are beans and stuff like that, beans and peas, because people don't eat that much of it, but they all offer lots of benefits in terms of fiber. They fill you up well, minerals, vitamins, blah, blah. And yes, whole grains are also fine, but a lot of people already do that. So I'm not telling you guys to eat more bread or eat more whole grain rice and stuff like that. Did a question come by?
Yes. So Steffi asked polyols.
Yeah.
I think she's asking for the spelling. Nederlands is het polyolen. Letterlijk hoe je denkt het is. Polyolen.
Yeah. P-O-L-Y-O-L.
Yeah.
And in Dutch, it's also with a Y. P-O-L-Y-O-L-A-N.
Yes.
More questions?
Nope.
Cool, we can go on to the next one. Don't ban anything. Enjoy food. Avoid feelings of guilt or failure. So this mostly relates to the mental aspect of things. You don't want to ban things, because if you ban things, there's a bigger chance that you're going to crave it at some point. It is certainly possible to ban things in some cases. For some people, it may be beneficial, but usually those are specific cases. An extreme example is alcohol. You don't tell a recovering alcoholic, like, oh yeah, you can have 2 beers, don't worry about it. That's not something you do. So for someone who may have had an eating disorder, telling them to just, let loose during the holidays, or just don't worry about it, it may actually be a trigger for them to go back to a disorder. So you have to look at the specific person to be able to, again, it's context, it's nuances and so on. But in general, for people who are not in specific situations, it is often good to learn to enjoy food and do not deprive yourself of things, right? Related to that, avoid feelings of guilt or failure. Imagine what happens to a chronic dieter, that is someone who diets most of their life. They try a diet, it works temporarily, they fall back, they try another one, and at some point they accumulate years and years of dieting. What happens to this person if constantly they set a goal and they fail their goal, and they do it again and they fail and they fail and they fail? You're going to have feelings of failure. We've seen in studies that it may actually be very detrimental to your, how do you say it? Not your sense of self, your self-confidence, basically. Add to that feelings of guilt. Sometimes you have people who are eating something tasty, they feel bad about it. Usually when I coach someone with nutrition and they send me a message saying like, hey, I ate this, I shouldn't have done it. They ate, I don't know, this whole bar of chocolate or a bucket of Ben & Jerry's, whatever. My first question was, did you enjoy it? Yes? Okay, well, let's not worry about it. Let's see what we're going to do now. Did you not enjoy it? Okay, then why did you do it? And there's probably an underlying thing and we need to take a look at that, right? So guilt is not necessarily a bad thing. Guilt can have a function. Guilt can help you make sure, things like guilt and shame can help you make sure that you don't do things again, right? It has a social function. But what function does it have if you feel guilty overeating a piece of chocolate? Then it doesn't serve a function anymore. So then it might be an issue that you need to address. Next up. Yeah, so this one is highly specific. I actually consider taking it out of this slide. Don't be distracted during meals unless it is for a very good reason. So if you're distracted, there is a bigger chance that you will overeat. But that is an issue for people who are overweight or who need to manage their weight. If you're watching Netflix, there's a bigger chance that you keep eating than when you're actually looking at your food and focusing on the taste and the texture and so on. So the whole mindless eating thing, but it's not necessarily a problem for health, unless it causes you to gain weight, for example. But other than that, it's not necessarily an issue. So again, it depends on the person, but for a lot of people, because we know a lot of people are overweight or want to do weight management, then you don't want to be distracted during meals, unless it is for a very good reason, like social settings. Of course, when you're going out to dinner with friends, you want to, you know, actually have fun with each other. Otherwise, you might as well just order food and sit at home. So then, yes, it's okay to be distracted. Although in most settings, you will usually talk in between courses. You know, let's say it's a super elaborate 3-course meal. You have an appetizer and then you talk and rest for 15 minutes and then comes the next meal and so on. So even then you don't have to be distracted during meals. But in social settings, it's often less of an issue in this setting that I mentioned because you automatically have a specific portion. If you are from a foreign family like I am half Indonesian, then it's a big issue. Why? Because imagine this, Indonesian birthday. You have around 20, 30 people in one house. They're spread throughout the whole house everywhere. There's food everywhere. There's a whole table filled with about 10 different dishes. There are 4 or 5 people in the kitchen making additional food. And everyone's eating and talking all the time, standing and sitting everywhere. And as soon as your plate is empty, you just go for the next one. And then you constantly have these older people like your aunt and your grandma and so on, who constantly tell you that you need to eat more because they don't want you to be hungry. And then at some point, the party is over and there's way too much food every single time. And they put the food in all these Tupperware buckets and so on. And you get more food to eat at home. All these things together, I mean, it's awesome. I mean, I love the whole family thing, but you see the whole socio-cultural aspect here again. But in this case, the social-cultural aspect is very conducive to weight gain. For some people, it's fine. For some people, it's not. So again, don't be extreme in one or the other when it comes to being distracted and not being distracted. But take a look at the context and see if it's okay to be distracted or not. All right. Any questions before we go into the next one? I think that's the last one. Yes, last one.
Nothing yet.
Because the next one is very important for pretty much everyone, I guess, most people anyway. Cool. Design your environment to keep you consistent. I mentioned earlier that consistency is everything because even the best diet will not help if you're not reasonably consistent. So how do you do that? Design your environment. Our willpower is limited, is fickle. Motivation is fickle. So how do you actually manage to stick to things? Design your environment. If a trigger to eat is being faced with food, so you know there's a bucket of cookies in front of you on a table while you're working, there's a lot bigger chance than if you had to go upstairs to the cupboard to get those cookies, right? So the simple thing you do is put those cookies upstairs in the cupboard instead of right in front of your face. Another thing could be that if you know that you have a tendency to snack while you're working behind your laptop, chew gum. Because if you're chewing gum, there's less of a chance that you'll actually grab ice cream or anything else, right? So those are a few examples of things you can do in terms of designing your environment. So taking away the triggers that make you eat, putting away the triggers that make you not eat, like chewing gum. Those are 2 examples of things you can do to help you stay consistent. I see there was a question.
Yes. Oh, we just have someone else. Do you have a question? Because I don't have a question.
I saw people in the chat. Oh no, those are with the 2 from Steffi. Okay. Cool. No more questions on this, then we're going to go on to the next one. The design your environment thing is super elaborate. If you want to learn more about that, look at the 3rd webinar. That's where we go more in depth with a lot of examples about how to deal with all those things. So it's quite possible if you guys have questions, we'll have a Q&A at the end. If you guys have questions, there's a big chance we'll say like, hey, we discussed this in webinar 3, go watch the video. It's not working. There we go. Assignment, yeah. So normally when we have the seminar in live, we have an assignment about what could you do to be healthier. We're going to explore a bit with people's behavior and so on. I'm not going to do anything with that right now. Performance. So we talked about health mostly, and we're going to talk about performance. Now there is a lot of overlap in health and performance, but it is not always 100% the same. An extreme example would be that if you are aiming for the Olympics, there's a bigger chance of injury because you're putting way more time into the sport, you're putting more effort into it, you're putting more strain on your body. It's the same with nutrition. Let's say that you are a weightlifter, for example, and you need to go up a weight class. So you need to gain weight. Well, if you look at heavyweight weightlifters, they're usually heavily overweight. Even if they're very muscular, they still have a lot of fat there. That is certainly not conducive to their health. But it may help them with recovery and with lifting more weight. So that is a particular example of how they use their nutrition. They eat more to help them perform better, but not necessarily be any healthier. Wow, what a shocker, consistency. It's the same thing with performance. If you want to eat a lot of protein so you can build more muscle or get stronger, that's great. But you need to be able to do that consistently, because doing that once in a while is not going to help. You want to take a supplement like creatine, it only works if you take it consistently, and so on. Losing fat and building muscle. Well, the basic premise here is if you want to lose fat, you need to eat less than you burn. And if you want to build muscle, you need to eat more than you burn, right? However, if you eat more than you burn, you will also gain fat. And if you eat less than you burn, you will also lose muscle. This is the basic premise. If you eat less, you will lose fat and muscle. If you eat more, you gain fat and muscle. That's the basic premise. In practice, however, it is a bit more nuanced. Why? Because it is possible to lose fat and build muscle at the same time. But one, it is very hard. It requires you to be very strict with nutrition, have a very solid training program. And it also depends on the person, because some people just have way better genetics for building muscle. So it's quite possible that if I have decent genetics, I can eat, let's say, 10% less, and I still build some muscle and I lose fat at a decent pace. Awesome. It's quite possible that someone else needs to overfeed to be able to build decent amounts of muscle. This depends on the person. So building muscle is very much dependent on genetics. Losing fat, however, way less. The only factor in genetics that is probably very much a factor is the effect that it has on your behavior, because some people just feel less energetic when they eat less. So that means they start moving around less. So yes, you move less and burn less. Okay, that happens. But in general, the actual lowering of how many calories you burn, so that's, you know, the body heat and the basic metabolic rate, we've went over that in webinar 1. It doesn't change that much if you look at genetics. There is some variety, certainly, but it's very small. Most of the variety that comes from why one person's metabolism lowers more than the other is that one person responds to weight loss by moving less than the other. So yeah, for performance, eat more, eat less. And there are certain strategies to do both at the same time. Not everyone agrees on whether it is most efficient use of your time, but this is the basic premise. No matter what weird tricks people use, in general, eating more is better recovery, means building more muscle. You want to eat less and still build muscle. Possible for beginners, possible for people who use drugs, possible for people who have great genetics, also possible for people who regain muscle. So if you ever were super muscular and you stopped working out for 2 years because of whatever reason, and then you start training again, you will build muscle way faster than before. It's what people usually refer to as muscle memory. Any questions on losing fat and building muscle?
No.
All right. In webinar 3, we'll also talk about methods. So then we talk a bit more about, you know, how do you measure it, and what method should you use? Should you be losing fat at all? And if so, should you be counting your calories, or should you be doing something completely different? Because counting calories stresses you out, and so on. Fueling workouts. So this depends on a lot of factors, again, but what does it depend on? Well, first of all, the length of your workout and the intensity. So if we're talking about endurance versus strength, endurance work requires way more energy, right? So strength work might take a lot more in terms of muscle damage, for example, but endurance training requires way more energy. So if you run a marathon, it's going to take you, well, the best people in the world run between 2 and 3 hours, but a lot of people will take longer than 3 hours. That means you need a lot of fuel to be able to sustain that. When you have multiple workouts in a day, especially if they're high volume, let's say that you have a CrossFit competition, you have 4 workouts and all of them last 20 minutes or longer. You need to refuel in between those workouts. In general, to be able to fuel your workouts, unless you are specifically an endurance athlete who does something that lasts longer than an hour or 1.5 hours, so we're talking about that marathon, people with less volume, as we refer to it, usually can keep it very simple. Make sure you have some carbohydrates before your workout. So it could be anything like pasta, bread, something like that. And avoid lots of fat before the workout because it means you will digest slower. And for some people, they get nauseous and so on. That works very well for most people, simply for fueling, not for recovering. For recovering, you should probably have protein spread throughout the day over at least 3 or 4 moments in the day. But for pure fueling your workout, a lot of people, especially recreational athletes who train twice a week, you don't even have to worry about it. Those who are a bit more serious about it, having some carbs before a workout and little fats can already help a great deal. It gets more complicated if you have super long endurance events, because then you also have to eat during running or cycling. Then you have to experiment with what does your stomach handle well and whatnot. Are you going to eat those energy gels with sugar, or are you just going to have like whole meals while running, or how much can you actually carry with you? So there's a lot of other factors that come into that. Any questions so far?
Nope.
Nope.
Oh, I do. They keep being slow, guys. So it says no, and then suddenly when I refresh, it says 3 questions. Okay. I don't know if this is the right time to ask, but whenever I want to lose weight, I need to be in a calorie deficit. How do I know when I'm in a deficit?
If you're losing weight. Next question. No. The question was, how do you know if you're in a caloric deficit? If you consistently lose fat, you are in a caloric deficit. If you are not losing fat, you are not in a caloric deficit. The thing that complicates this is that your body is more than fat. It is also muscle, bone, subcutaneous water, intramuscular water, and so on. So let's say that you lose a kilo of fat, but at the same time, you're also very stressed over work and you're training a lot. So your body holds more water, maybe 2 kilos of water in extreme case for some people. It looks like you've gained 1 kilo, but you've actually lost 1 kilo of fat anyway. So that goes into the measuring thing, and that's something you should watch the webinar 3 video for. But the short answer is, if you're losing fat, then you are in a caloric deficit. If you're not losing fat, you are not in a caloric deficit. Next one.
I do have a question on creatine.
Yeah.
Since you briefly mentioned it,
Yeah.
do you need to take breaks in supplementation,
No.
or is it better to always take it and stay consistent?
Always take it, stay consistent. 5 grams a day, the rest of your life. Only take creatine monohydrate, which is the simplest one and also the one where they did the most studies on. All the other variations, unreliable, usually a lot more expensive. So yeah, some people are worried that taking creatine will make sure your body creates less. I'm like, well, nobody cares. You're taking it in from another source. So why would you worry about your body temporarily producing less? It doesn't matter because you can keep taking it. So yeah, 5 grams a day, every single day, rest of your life. That's it.
Okay, and how important are carbs for recovery / after workout?
That depends. If you had a really heavy workout, like especially a long workout, so like a marathon, you are depleted from carbohydrates. Now, I assume you're going to rest after a marathon, but if you have something very long and you want to perform again, then you need to replenish your carbohydrates. So then carbohydrates after workout are important. But this usually only goes if you have a lot of workouts in quick succession and or when you train with high volume. So if you have a weightlifting program, for example, you know, snatches, clean and jerks, and back squats, all sets of 3, you don't need that many carbohydrates to be able to sustain that, you know, because most of the time in a weightlifting workout, you're sitting still. What was the other part of the question?
No, it was the same. So,
recovery.
Recovery /
Yeah.
after workouts.
Yeah, so replenishing for recovery, for actual recovery from training, carbs can have their function. They're just not super important, but they have their function. They help with releasing more insulin, which helps with bringing nutrients to the muscles and so on. So eating carbs after training can be beneficial, but for people who do not train often in high volume, it's not that important. Cool, more questions?
Nope, this was it for now.
Nutrient timing. Yeah, so I basically already mentioned the important things because you can go very much in depth with this. The most important things are, before a lengthy or high volume workout, more carbs, less fat, and spread your protein intake over at least 3, ideally 4 moments of the day. So breakfast, lunch, dinner, pre-bed snack, something like that, you know. That will definitely help with recovery. If you go way more than that, I think beyond 5, so if you have 6 or more meals with protein, it's probably not going to do anything beneficial. It may even be suboptimal for recovery because your body responds well to a large bolus of protein. If you want to know more about that, let me know in the questions. I'll go more in depth. But as a general practical guideline, spread out over 3 or 4 meals over the day, your protein intake. And you've probably optimized it for the vast majority of people. That's already optimizing enough. More questions? No.
Nope.
Good. So those are the important things for nutrient timing. If you guys want to know more specific stuff, then let me know. One more thing is about quality of sleep. Sleep super important. Not everyone responds the same to food before sleep. There is some suggestion that certain foods are better for quality of sleep than others. So protein would be better. Fast carbohydrates would be worse. However, fast carbohydrates also produce more serotonin, which makes you feel relaxed. Science is not quite sure about this, but there is some research on it. I would just say experiment with it. If you feel like a big meal helps you sleep well and deep, good. If not, if it just keeps you awake, or just drinking a lot of water before going to sleep makes you come out of bed to pee twice a night, then don't do it. Healthy relationship with food. Well, there it is again. Basically everything I said for health goes here as well, with the caveat that sometimes you have to make sacrifices for your sport if you're very performance oriented. So I mentioned that, well, let's say you are a woman. Women are usually more pressured in society to look good. Just look at commercials, there's a lot of pressure on them to look good. And we see that they are also a bigger risk group for eating disorders and so on. So imagine that you are a woman, you are in a sport with weight classes. Imagine that you get the chance to get to a higher level, but you have to lose weight. Well, it can have an impact. Now imagine the other way around. Your coach tells you, yes, you can become one of the best in the world. You have to gain 20 kilos. How would you feel about that? If you knew you would have to gain 20 kilos of weight, what would that do to you mentally? So if you are very performance oriented, sometimes you will have to make these choices, and it can be pretty hard in some cases. So it's something to keep in the back of your head if you're serious about performance. Performance and aesthetics don't always match. And if you are in a risk group in that sense, that might be something to consider. Cool. More questions on performance? I think that was it. Yeah.
No. Let's give my laptop a few seconds to go. Nope.
Cool. Just going to give you guys a few awkward seconds while I replenish. Cool. How to set goals. So we've gone over the performance and the health part. At the end, there's a Q&A where you guys can ask more questions. For now, I want to take you through the process that I usually use with people when it comes to setting goals. You could take this very in a broad manner, I guess. It could be for nutrition, could be for training, but I'm sure that you could even do this for life goals or whatever. First, set a long-term goal. This can be relatively abstract. So it could be like, I want to lose weight. I want to bench 100 kilos, whatever. And ask yourself why at least twice. You don't always have to ask yourself why, but there are situations where it can be super relevant. Let's have a simple example. Someone comes to me and says, I want to lose 5 kilos. I will certainly ask why. Because if you need to lose 5 kilos for a weight class, we could just lose water weight. That's very different from someone who says, in 4 months from now, I have my wedding, I need to fit in my dress because I gained 5 kilos. Okay, there's a different situation. You may have a CrossFit athlete who wants to perform better and says, well, I need to lose some weight because I have a lot of unnecessary fat and it hinders me in my pull-ups and my gymnastics and so on. Okay, sure. You might also have someone who says, well, I just want to look better. It's just a vanity thing. Okay, sure. You might have someone who's just super insecure and who just has troubles with himself or herself. And in that particular case, it's not even about the weight loss. It's more about how this person views themselves, right? So we have five different situations that all require a different approach. Some need to be coached in the mental aspect more. Some don't need to lose fat. They can just lose water. It depends on the person, on the situation. But in general, I would ask yourself why at least twice. So I want to lose 10 kilos. Why? For health reasons. Why for health? Are you unhealthy? Well, I have diabetes in the family and I'm quite overweight and not super fit. So, okay, well, then there's something concrete there. You don't want to get diabetes. And yes, being overweight is a factor in diabetes. So, that's kind of how you can come to a more practical plan. Then you break the long-term goal into smaller goals. So if you say, I want to lose 10 kilos, I do not find that an acceptable goal. That's a fine long-term goal, not a fine small goal. Why? Because if you want to lose 10 kilos, every single kilo you lose is still not 10 kilos. There is a chance that either consciously or subconsciously, you are telling yourself, no, I've not reached 10 kilos yet. I have not reached 10 kilos yet. Still no 10 kilos. But if you break it up into 1 kilo goals, for example, after every single milestone, you can say, okay, I achieved something. I'm on the right track. I am doing well, right? So after every milestone or after every set amount of time, you need to evaluate. For some people, it doesn't work. There are some people who need to be focused on the big goal because they feel like small goals are distracting, or maybe they don't feel like they deserve to celebrate the small goals. I don't know if that is a very healthy mindset. There are people who do it that way. They say like, well, never make a plan B. Always force yourself to make sure that plan A succeeds. I'm not a big fan of that train of thought, but it's certainly a way of doing it. I would say make smaller goals, celebrate the small goals, and make sure you use that as motivation to keep you on track, right? Make a concrete plan for the smaller goals. Well, that's actually like the training plan or the diet or the whatever you're doing. And you adjust as necessary. So you need to evaluate, because you don't want to find out after 10 weeks, oh, I didn't lose any weight. No, you measure. And every week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks or something, you make sure that you measure again so you can adjust. Because maybe after 4 weeks you haven't lost any weight. Then you really need to change something, ideally earlier, but you certainly don't want to wait 10 weeks with that. And then the step for long-term adherence, we've gone over this before, design an environment conducive to your plan. So, you know, maybe for someone who wants to be healthier and fitter, you can go to a CrossFit box, you know, because then you have people around you, which helps motivate you. You have coaches helping you out instead of going to the gym by yourself. Or maybe if it's about nutrition, like I said, chew gum if you know that you're liable to eat lots of candy when you're working behind your laptop. But make sure that you, motivation usually lasts for 1-2 months. Then people start losing motivation and then they drop off the bandwagon. You want to make sure that your environment and all the triggers around you help you stick to something, so you do not have to worry about the motivation thing, because motivation is going to go and it's going to come back at some point, right? Cool. Questions on this?
Nope.
So few questions. Last time we had a lot more people, a lot more questions, so it was pretty long. This time, nice, 1 hour and 15 minutes. Guys, we have reached the end here. So here's the Q&A. I'm just going to hang out here for a bit so you guys can ask many questions as you like.
Now's the time, Chris. Go for it.
Oh, is there a question?
Yeah, but he said, I have a question, but I think it's better for the end. This is the end.
This is the end. Hit us up. All your questions, give them to us. Just going to show you guys my face in full view again.
Cool things. Well, this is a nice one. Do I have to adjust my diet during quarantine?
Well, you don't have to do anything. You have to do whatever you like. But so if you move less than you normally do, you most likely burn fewer calories than you normally do. So in that sense, yes, for weight management, absolutely. Other than that, maybe, because quarantine already changes a lot of people's eating habits. We have seen a lot of people recently. We do a lot of private coaching at UnScared, and we've talked to a lot of people, and they had issues with maintaining their eating habits because their environment has changed so much. Normally, maybe you're in meetings and you're preoccupied with work. Now you're at home and you're sitting behind your laptop and you have the refrigerator right here. The refrigerator is like right beside me here. If I'm working here behind my laptop, I could just reach over and grab whatever I want from the refrigerator. So a lot of people have that issue. Well, not the refrigerator, but changing circumstances. So that whole designing your environment thing now works the other way around. Your environment has been designed and possibly your habits have changed. So you have to see in your specific situation, do you need to adjust anything? Well, it depends. Are you concerned with weight management or anything else? Cool. More questions?
I think Chris is still trying to phrase it in the way that would make most sense. So we'll give him a second.
Is Chris van den Nol or is it another Chris?
I don't know. Nobody knows.
No, it's Chris without a last name. All right, mysterious Chris.
No pressure, but definitely pressure.
Waiting for all the intelligent questions. Keep in mind, guys, a lot of things related to this subject are on webinar 1 and 3. So if you really want to know more about the practical methods, so in session 3, we talk a bit about fasting as a method. We talk a bit about if it fits your macros. We talk a bit about the paleo diet, about clean eating, the keto diet, and so on. We also talk a lot about obstacles. So what if you're traveling a lot for work? What if you are, I don't know, maybe if you have late night hunger cravings, whatever's, stuff like that. This question.
I'm being very active last week and eating healthier, but I'm gaining weight. Why is that?
So if you're gaining weight, it could be for a variety of things. If you are gaining fat, it means you are eating more than you are burning. No matter how, no matter what. You say you're eating healthier, that says nothing because you can eat healthy and you can eat a lot, or you can eat unhealthy and eat very little. It's very possible to lose weight while you're eating junk food. It's probably not very practical, it's not very sustainable, but it's certainly possible. So eating healthy doesn't say anything. Have you gained fat, then you are simply eating more than you burn. But maybe you've gained water. If you are very stressed, stress is one reason why people hold water sometimes. Could be mental stress, could be physical stress. Maybe you've been working out a lot, so you get more inflammation in your muscles, so your muscles hold more water as well. If you use creatine, for example, if you eat a bit more salt than you normally do, you're anonymous. I don't know if you're a woman, but if you're a woman and you're PMSing, there's also a chance that you're holding more weight. So all these factors can lead to weight gain, and only one of them is actually fat. And of course, there's muscle, but if it's only 1 week, you're not going to build a lot of muscle in a week. Not even if you're on lots of doping. Cool. More questions?
Not yet.
All right. I'm going to stare very awkwardly at you guys.
Oh, yes. Long one. Nice.
Oh, boy.
Okay. I have the feeling I need to gain weight due to the fact that I will be stronger that way. Is this true? Let's read the whole thing and then I'll break it up in bits. Okay. So due to the fact that I will be stronger that way. Is this true? FE. I have no idea what that of is.
For example.
Oh, wow. For example, I want to lift more with clean jerk snatch but still be able to do CrossFit. How do I know I need to gain weight? And what are measurable steps to slightly adjust my current diet without overhauling, which could have more potential to failure? Yes, it's Chris van der Nolle.
Hey, Chris van der Nolle. All right. Yeah, let's break it up into steps. You have the feeling you need to gain weight so that you will be stronger. To some extent, yes. And there's a lot of factors in that. One, if you eat more, you recover better. Two, if there's more fat in your body, the attachment points will slightly change. So some people will move more efficiently. In certain movements, you can literally bounce on your fat. So if you have like thick calves and thick hamstrings, so both the muscle and fat, you can actually bounce off of it in a weightlifting squat. Those are not things that are going to make you hugely strong, by the way. They're just small factors that help. Gaining muscle is more likely to be useful, even though you don't need that much muscle to be super strong. But to some extent, there is a very direct link between muscle mass and strength. So yes, it will most likely help, but only if you gain more strength than muscle. What does that mean? That means that if you gain 1 kilo of weight, you need to be able to pull up 2 kilos more of weight. Why? Because otherwise the net result in gymnastics is the same. Okay, cool, you can snatch a bit more. But what about your pull-ups? If your snatch goes up and your pull-up goes down, for CrossFit, that's not practical. So you want to gain enough weight to recover very well, to get stronger. But at the same time, you need to get so much stronger that your gymnastics are not going to suffer under it. So how do you know if you need to gain weight? Well, I know what you look like. You need to gain weight. Not aesthetically, by the way. I think you're fine. I think you're fine. I look you're hot. But no, I'm not speaking about aesthetically, but I think that purely for strength stuff, super slow weight gain would probably be good for you. What are manageable steps? Just either add a meal somewhere during the day or increase the size of the meal. That's the simplest thing you can do. So there could be something as simple as normally before bed, maybe you have like a kvark. A lot of people eat like kvark before bed because, it helps with recovery and so on. A lot of athletes do that. Just add like 2 hands of nuts or like 2 slices of bread with peanut butter every night before you do that. Something small like that could already help. Of course, there's a lot of details that you can look at, but in general, small steps like just adding a bigger meal or a new meal to your daily rhythm is usually fine. Also talk to your private coach, by the way. I don't want to give you advice that goes counter to what your private coach says. Cool.
Okay.
Yes, it is a specific question, but it's actually very relevant for a lot of people because it does show that aesthetics and performance are not always related. Because maybe you're super happy with your six-pack, but now I'm telling you to gain weight and you may lose your six-pack. So,
Now
yeah.
he doesn't want to gain weight anymore.
Huh?
Now he doesn't want to gain weight anymore. No.
See, someone else. Someone says it was relevant for me too, Chris. Thanks for asking. Cool. More questions. We have a lot of time left, guys, so don't be afraid if you think, okay, I'm asking a question that's relevant for another webinar. Don't worry about it. No questions. Cool. All right. I'm going to hang out here for a minute or so, and if there are no other questions, then I'll kick you guys out later on. Just a reminder, webinar 1 and 3 are on YouTube. Email me at jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com if you want to have the links. If you guys have specific questions that are relevant for you specifically later on, if you train at UnScared, just send a message to your own private coach. They'll help you out. And am I forgetting anything else? Oh yeah, for you non-UnScaredians. Wait, I think everyone here. I think Mike is the only one. Hi, Mike. Yeah, we have a daily email that we send out to everyone with home workouts and stuff. We also have blog posts on nutrition and other related stuff. It's all free for non-UnScaredians. So if you're interested, let me know. And I'll send you the link so you can get awesome stuff every day.
Okay, we have one more coming up from Maria. Meanwhile, we have, what's the fuss with creatine? Oh no, you just opened Pandora's box.
I don't understand the question. What's the fuss with creatine?
Why is it such a hype? Why do you think it's so important?
Well, it helps you with recovery. It helps you with sports performance. It may help with brain health in the long run. It may help with recovery even for endurance athletes, but to a lot lesser extent. Creatine is also very cheap. It has been well researched. So it's one of the very, very few supplements that I often recommend to people. Creatine monohydrate, 5 grams every single day. Get the cheapest version. That's it. That literally costs you like €5 per month. For endurance, slightly less important, but for CrossFit and weightlifting and powerlifting, it's good. Only downside of creatine is you may hold some water inside your muscles, so you could gain like ½ a kilo. Yeah, that's only relevant if you're in weight classes, because aesthetically it doesn't change anything. So I don't know if that answers your question or if you meant anything else, but
if we didn't answer your question, let us know.
I'm very curious about Maria's question.
Me too. It's going to be a good one. Oh yes. Let's say I lost some weight. How do I know if it's just water? Good one.
Yeah. So make sure to watch webinar 3, where I go very much in depth on measuring. But the short answer is that the only reliable way is if you do a DEXA scan. That's fairly reliable. That's where they put you in this machine and they look at what's inside your whole body. Other than that, you could do things like measure your waist with measuring tape and measure your legs and your hips and all that. And if you measure that way, then you can see like if you actually lost, if you lose an inch around your stomach and your waist, your hips, then it's probably not water, it's probably fat. But other than that, you probably don't really know, because then you have measured it beforehand as well. So right now, in hindsight, you don't really know. But as a rule of thumb, I usually tell people that around 2% of your weight, up and down, is very normal to fluctuate. So if you're like 1%, when you weigh 1% less than you normally do, that's 100% normal. Perhaps tomorrow you'll be heavier and the day after you're going to be lighter. So, but if you're more than 2% down and it stays like that, then it is more likely that it is fat, because water continues to fluctuate. And if you go down and you stay down, then it's a bigger chance that it's actually fat. So yeah, take a look at the long run, look at the trend. I usually tell people not to worry too much about a specific measurement, but look at the trend. That's more reliable. Cool. More questions?
No, not yet. Now's the last chance, guys.
Micah has one.
Yes, go for it. Good, guys. If you have a question and you're like, no, I need to ask it, just let us know and then we'll wait for a little bit longer.
Yeah, I'm going to hang out here for a bit anyway, so don't worry. I have no life. Quarantine life. Oh wait, the recording is still on. Sorry guys, now you guys have missed my sparkling sense of humor and UnScared. All right, Chris, I'm going to block you from my webinars forever now.
Most certainly will.
Okay, so Chris asks if 5G will affect his performance during sport. I'm going to give an honest answer here. I do not know, but I suspect not, because it is a form of radiation. And most radiation, as we know, it does not have a significant effect. Although we do know that certain radiation can have an impact on your water levels in your body, if I'm not mistaken. And certain radiation, not 5G, but higher amounts of radiation can be damaging. Think of the sun, for example, getting sunburned. So 5G does not come near the radiation you get from the sun. So no, Chris, 5G will not affect your performance during sport.
Can your body reach a certain weight where it's comfortable and just stay like that, even if you change your diet or exercise?
That's a tough question to answer. Can your body reach a certain weight where it's comfortable and just stays like that, even if you change your diet or exercise? That depends on how you change your diet and exercise. There is the thermostat theory, which came from the set point theory. Long story short, some people have a certain weight that their body seems to want to go to. They lose 5 kilos, they go back to the weight. They gain 5 kilos, they go back to the base weight. This base weight, which used to be referred to as a set point, can change. That's why at some point, instead of a set point, people start calling it a settled point. Because if you lose 5 kilos and you stay at that weight for long enough, at some point, your body's going to have a new settle point and it's going to want to go to that weight. However, regardless of that settle point, regardless of the theory behind it, because there are several theories, some psychological, some physiological as well, or neurological, regardless of that settle point, if you change your diet and your caloric intake changes from what you burn in a day, you will still gain or lose weight. For exercise, the impact of exercise is not that big on your body weight. But if you suddenly start exercising a lot, let's say you do cardio like 20 hours a week, all of a sudden, that will have an impact. And yes, there's a bigger chance you will lose weight. So it may be the other way around, actually. If you change your diet or your exercise, your body, especially your behavior, will change to accommodate it. That is more likely. I don't even know if this answers your question, by the way, but it is not possible for your body physically to 100% resist everything you throw at it. Cool. All right, more questions. I'm surprised everyone's still here. Usually when the Q&A starts, half the people leave. I'm glad you guys have so much faith in me.
You shouldn't have, but it's nice of you.
Yeah, it is.
Okay, if you have a question, let us know. And then, oh, okay.
Got another question.
Yay!
It's okay, guys. If you need some time, I can always do tricks in front of the camera. Like, you know how I can make the look. It's a floppy pencil.
Wow.
It's cool. Like I can do magic tricks. Ah, there.
Will you talk about hormones and weight loss again in the next one?
I'll talk about, because this is the last one. The third one, third webinar, which is on YouTube. Did I talk about hormones anywhere? Hardly. No, we know hormones as like a main subject. And no, you mentioned like leptin. No, leptin is something that is secreted by your fat cells, has an impact on hunger and so on. The reason why I usually don't talk about hormones that much is twofold. One, it doesn't matter much for a lot of people because all the things that happen, ghrelin is another hormone that works with your, and the YY peptide, they influence your hunger levels and so on. Reasons why I don't talk about it so much is one, regardless of trying to manipulate ghrelin and leptin and so on, it all boils down to the practical method. So for most people, it's super irrelevant. It's just fun to know. That's one. The second reason, it is super complex because you cannot focus on one hormone and try to manipulate that and expect everything to adjust to that. Simple example, insulin is the hormone that helps with shuttling nutrients into cells. And the issue with that is a lot of people said, well, if insulin shuttles nutrients into cells, insulin helps with storing fat. So if insulin makes you fat, then just don't eat things that make you secrete insulin so you can't get fat anymore, right? It's a very mechanistic way of thinking. It is not true. We've seen this study after study after study. It doesn't work like that. It's the same with dopamine. Dopamine has often been called like a happiness hormone because you get dopamine release when good, awesome stuff happens, when you're super excited and during sex and all that sort of stuff. It also doesn't work like that because we saw that with people who gamble, for example, when they're addicted. When you win in gambling, obviously you get a dopamine rush, right? That's something people understand. But when these people lose, they lose a lot of money, they feel super shitty and they still have a big dopamine rush, but they don't feel very good. So those are just two of the many examples that focusing on a hormone is not always very conducive to either predicting or adjusting things in real life. So I rarely talk about it because no matter what way you look at it, it's always the same thing. For weight loss and gain, the caloric balance, the energy balance needs to be in order and it needs to be sustainable. So yeah, a lot of the mechanisms you see described regarding hormones are true. Leptin has an influence on hunger, just like ghrelin and YY peptide. Insulin and glucagon make sure to balance out your blood sugar levels and so on. All that is 100% true. The thing is, does it really matter? Well, probably not for most people. Plus, it's super complicated. I am by far not a neurologist. I've read a lot of books on it from several gurus, but even they often resort to the mechanistic way of thinking that is not very conducive to sustainable results. Because again, if you cannot stick to a certain method or diet, what the hell does it matter what leptin does? You know, what does it matter if you down-regulated your ghrelin because you adjusted your meal times to your circadian rhythm, and so on. Okay.
Yeah.
I hope that answers your question. If not, actually the short answer to your question was no. But if that doesn't answer your question, let me know. I see another question coming up.
I have an issue that after losing 10 kilo, wow, talking is hard. I actually feel okay, but I know my weight is still too high, close size and BMI, which makes it hard for me to start again. And the idea that there's still a long way to go, then another 10 kilo is freezing me. Do you go into that in the other webinar?
Let me break this up into several parts. You mentioned first that the issue you have is that after losing 10 kilos, you actually feel okay. I would say, okay, stick with that. If you feel okay, why would you change anything, right? So that is one. You have achieved something, it's cool. You feel okay, that's cool. Enjoy that, right? Take a moment to focus on that particular thing because you have done something you wanted to and you have achieved something. And if you are feeling okay, that is awesome. You need to stick to that. That's one. You said my weight is still too high, clothes size and BMI, you find it hard to start again. If it is important to you to lose more weight beyond those 10 kilos, which is very well possible, and it demotivates you or freezes you, as you say, that you have to do another 10 kilos, this basically resorts to what I said earlier. You have a long-term goal, it could be losing 100 kilos. You need to cut that up into short goals. Some people even advocate diet breaks. So that maybe is like every 5 kilos you lose or after every 3 months, you take a diet break. So both physically and mentally, you can get some rest from it, and then you keep going. That's possible. Maybe you could kind of re-envision it a bit, just like with your deadlift. Maybe you say you want to deadlift 150 kilos. Let's say you deadlift 100 kilos now, and your deadlift goes up from 100 to 110. Would you then feel very bad about, oh no, I have still another 40 kilos to go before I reach a 150 kilo deadlift? Probably not. I reckon, especially because I know who you are, I reckon that if you would have a deadlift PR, you would be very happy with it and you would be motivated to go to the next step. Why? Because people inherently see the PRs on a deadlift as an achievement. They're not too focused on that 150 that they have to do in a year or 2 years, they're focused on the actual short-term achievement that you could take step by step. I would try to reimagine this whole process. And again, assuming that it's important to you and you want to do it, I would try to reimagine it that way, right? It's losing 30 kilos is like going from 120 to 150 kilo deadlifts. Every single step you make is a PR. It is not very linear. It's a long-term thing, but every single step you achieve is another, it's worth a small party. Not literally, maybe, depends on you, but it's something you should probably take some pride in. And that changes the narrative in your head. Instead of, because this is exactly what I said earlier, like break up the big goal into small goals, because otherwise, every single time you achieve something, you're going to be like, I haven't achieved the goal, I haven't achieved the goal. This kind of sounds like the same thing. You say like, well, I lost 10 kilos, and I'm like, okay, if that was your goal, that's awesome. And then you say like, oh, yeah, but you're frozen because you have another 10 kilos to go. I'm like, yeah, but why? You've already done something awesome, you know, enjoy it, and then see if you want to go further on or not, right? I would rephrase it. It's not like you're not there yet. It's like you're already very far on, right? Cool. I hope that kind of helps you into a right direction.
Thanks a lot.
Cool. And again, go for the sustainability thing, right? If you lose 10 kilo and you feel okay, awesome. Maybe you should focus on keeping that for a while before you start thinking about new goals. Other questions, guys? Let me know.
Nothing.
It's okay. I probably have some more magic tricks I can do while you guys make up questions. You can talk about my haircut. Cecily did it.
Yeah, I think I did an excellent job. I'm proud of myself. I really do think that is it. Yeah,
I see no more new questions coming up. All right, I already told you guys, webinars are there. Email me at jeremy@unscaredcrossfit.com if you want the links. Any other questions, email me at that same email address or contact your own private coach if you're an Unscaredian who needs some help with nutrition coaching. Thank you all for your attention. I think I have nothing else to say. I don't know if Cecily wants to add anything.
No.
All right.
Thank you.
In that case, we are done for the day. You guys, thank you for your attention. I hope you guys learned something useful. If not, sorry for wasting 1.5 hours of your Saturday afternoon. And hopefully until the next one, make sure to check out our newsletter and so on for other webinars. We have webinars on behavioral training, planning, and there may be more stuff coming as well. Enjoy your weekend, guys. Don't forget to wash your hands. Hopefully see you guys soon.
Bye,
Farewell.
guys.